Chapter 7. At break, I tried to follow Vladimir out of class, but April pulled me to one side in the cloakroom and held up her right hand. The yellow ring gleamed. Behind her, Vladimir disappeared into the crowd. "What's wrong?" I asked. She bit her lip. "I can't take it off." "What do you mean?" "The ring," she said. "It won't come off. Grandma says that proves I'm a witch." Clasping the ring between my fingers, I tugged. It didn't budge. When I tried to pull harder, heat seared my fingers. I winced and jerked my hand away. I saw, to my shock, that my skin was burned. It stung, and I gritted my teeth. "What?" she asked. "What is it?" I closed my fist to hide my fingers. "Nothing," I lied, trying to keep my face calm. "It just burned me," I thought. "The ring just burned me." Did that mean magic was real? Was April a witch? "Something's wrong," she said. "Tell me." She looked worried enough. She didn't need to know that the ring could burn people too. "It's just stuck, that's all," I told her calmly. "What if it never comes off?" she asked. "April," I said. "It's only a ring." She nodded, unconvinced. I kept my hand clenched in a fist. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd just got an electric shock. When April wasn't paying attention, I checked my fingers. There was a thin line of pink across the skin. Weird, I thought as we walked out to the playground together. Could it be possible that witches were real? After all, vampires existed, and they were supposed to be a myth. Did that mean werewolves and demons were more than just fairy stories as well? The thought made me uneasy. As we made our way to the benches on the playground, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of Vladimir. April might be a witch, but my biggest priority was the fact that there was a vampire in my class. I had to focus on Vladimir. After all, he could be out there sucking someone's blood right this minute. I was vaguely aware of April talking to me, and I tried to follow along to what she said, but couldn't help tuning in and out. "Etty, are you listening to me?" she asked after a while. "Sorry?" "Never mind," she said. The note of disappointment in her voice made me wince. After that, we didn't say much. April went to chat with some of her other friends, leaving me alone on the bench. I sighed as I scanned the crowd for Vladimir, but at the end of break, I still hadn't spotted him. I vowed that at lunchtime I wouldn't let him get away. The rest of the morning's lessons seemed to go on forever. I didn't pay attention to anything Miss Gravel said, which wasn't hard since it was English and we were reading a book I could barely follow. Instead, I spent most of the time staring at the back of Vladimir's head. Finally, the bell rang for lunch. I hurried out of class, following Vladimir. He wasn't going to escape again. He took out his lunchbox and hurried down the corridor, in the wrong direction. The lunch hall was the other way. Quickly, I grabbed my lunch and, behind me, April did the same. "Where are we going?" she asked as she followed me along the corridor. Gently, I shushed her. "He'll hear you." "Who?" I didn't answer because, at that moment, Vladimir disappeared through a door further along the corridor. "Follow me," I told her. I approached the door slowly, and then peered through the little window. It was an empty classroom. Sitting on his own at one of the desks was Vladimir. He had his lunchbox in front of him, and there was no one else in there. Not sure what I was going to do, I opened the door and walked inside. Vladimir quickly shut the lid of his lunchbox, which was purple and glittery. I wondered what was inside it. Vampires didn't eat. They drank blood. So what could he be eating for lunch? Hello, he said softly. April entered the room before I could stop her, her lunchbox at her side. She tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled shyly. "I'm April," she said. "You're Vladimir?" My nerves were shredded. I was afraid that, at any moment, Vladimir would grip her by the shoulders and sink his teeth into her neck. Why had I brought her with me? How could I have been so stupid? Vladimir's cheeks turned pink. Hi, he said. "Please, call me Dimmy. I hate Vladimir." I stepped forward, ready to protect April if I needed to. "Why are you hiding in here?" I asked him suspiciously. "I'm not hiding," he replied. "I just don't know anyone yet." "Dimmy," April said, "you're not going to make any friends sitting in here on your own?" His shoulders slumped. I'm fine." "You can't eat by yourself on your first day," she said. "We'll eat in here with you." I tried not to show my panic. We couldn't stay in here with him. What if he decided to eat us instead of his lunch? "No," I said. "We should take Dimmy to the lunch hall." "But he's nervous," April replied. I frowned at her, but I knew from the look on her face that she wasn't going to change her mind. "Fine," I said. We all sat down and started eating. I watched carefully as Dimmy opened his lunchbox. Inside, I saw nothing unusual. There were carrot sticks, sandwiches, and cheese and onion crisps. "So," April said, "have you just moved to Brightwood?" No, Dimmy replied. "I've always lived here, with my dad." "I've never seen you around," April commented. Dimmy picked up a carrot stick and fiddled with it. "My dad is a bit protective. I don't get out much." "You don't like the sun?" I asked in a sharp voice. No, it's not that," Dimmy replied. "My mum died when I was young. Dad is worried that... I think he wants to keep me safe." "Oh," April said, and she leaned forward an inch. There was a definite spark of interest in her eyes. Was she thinking of her own parents? She'd never really spoken about them, other than to tell me they'd died when she was young. The thought of her sharing her painful memories with a vampire in disguise made me grit my teeth. I folded my arms. "So why are you here if your dad wants to keep you safe at home? Was it to suck all of our blood? Were you hoping school kids would be easy prey?" I used to be homeschooled," he replied. "But our house was broken into when I was home with Maggie, my tutor. I didn't see who the intruders were. Maggie took me to the safe room as soon as we heard them break the door down. But now Dad thinks I'll be safer at school." The way he said it, it sounded like he didn't agree. Maybe he didn't want to be here after all. Perhaps he was on some kind of vampire mission he couldn't get out of. I narrowed my eyes. I leaned forward, wishing I could see through his sunglasses. It might have helped me figure out if he was lying. I had the feeling there was something he wasn't telling us. If Dimmy was a vampire, how could he have a dad? His real, human dad couldn't possibly be looking after him. Dimmy would have drunk his blood by now. Unless his dad had been bitten too? Maybe they'd both been turned into vampires at the same time. There was also the strange fact that Dimmy's house had been broken into. Had his dad really sent Dimmy to school because he was worried about his safety? Since when did vampires fear robbers? There had to be another reason Dimmy was at school, and I was sure it wasn't to be safe from petty criminals. April was wide-eyed. "That must have been petrifying," she said. "Lucky you had a safe room." "It wasn't too bad," he said. "Not lucky, really. Dad's safety mad." April reached out to take his hand. Awkwardly, he lifted the carrot stick to his mouth, avoiding her touch. What was it like being homeschooled?" April asked, returning her hand to rest on her polka dot lunchbox. "It was great," Dimmy said. "Maggie looked after me while Dad was at work. She taught me all the usual subjects, but my favourite lesson was dance. She used to be a ballet teacher. She was the one who said I had to dress smart for my first day." "Well, you are dressed smart," April remarked, smiling encouragingly. "I like your bow tie." "Thanks," he replied. No one else is wearing one, though. I think Maggie was a bit old-fashioned. She was 80. Looking uncomfortable, Dimmy lifted his drink out of his lunchbox. I gasped. His bottle was filled with red liquid. Red! Not only that, but as he picked it up, I noticed his nails were see-through. They had no white part. "What's that?" April asked, inspecting his drink. "Oh," Dimmy replied. He paused and I watched him closely, wondering what he would say. "It's cranberry juice." "Cranberry juice?" I thought. "Blood, you mean?" "Oh," April replied. "I've never had that. Can I try some?" I almost choked on my apple. "Sure," Dimmy said, passing the bottle to her. She couldn't drink it. It was blood. It had to be blood. April took the bottle. She lifted it up to her mouth. "No!" I shouted and shot out my hand. Time seemed to slow down as two things happened at once. 1. The bottle flew out of April's hand and landed on the floor. 2. I accidentally elbowed Dimmy in the face, which made his sunglasses slip off. Quickly, he put them back on, but for a split second, I caught sight of Dimmy's pupils. They were huge, just like a vampire's. My blood turned cold. He is a vampire, I thought. He must be. April and Dimmy watched the red puddle of his drink spread across the floor. "Etty!" April said. Dimmy was still staring at his spilled drink. I picked up my lunchbox and took April by the arm. "Come on," I said. "We're leaving." "What?" She grabbed her lunchbox as I dragged her out of the room, leaving Dimmy alone behind us. There was no doubt about it. He was a vampire, and I wasn't supposed to sit and make friends with vampires. I was supposed to hunt them. Chapter 8. April wouldn't talk to me for the rest of lunch. When we got back to class, Dimmy walked in with tear tracks down his face and blotchy red cheeks. He carried his lunchbox. Miss Gravel reminded him to put it back on the trolley. And then people started noticing that it was purple and glittery. Whispers and giggles spread through the classroom. Dimmy backed away. He looked like he was about to start crying. For a moment, I felt sorry for him. "He's a vampire," I reminded myself. "He drinks human blood. He's evil." April still wouldn't talk to me as we waited to be picked up at the end of the day, and I was glad when Dad arrived to take me home. He asked me how my day had been, and, after I mumbled something in reply, we were silent. My mind was too busy for me to talk. I didn't say much at dinner either. I couldn't stop thinking about Dimmy and wondering if I should tell Mum about him. Not yet, I thought. I don't have enough proof. I don't want to get it wrong again. Not like last time. That's right. I was wary because this had happened before. In year 3, I had been sure that the new boy in our class, Bane Larkin, was a vampire. He'd had all the signs. 1, black hair. 2, pale skin. 3, white teeth. 4, nails bitten down so the whites couldn't be seen. Oh, and he was also pure evil. In Bane's first week, he'd found out that April was afraid of worms, so when he saw a big, fat one on the field a few days later, he'd taken it and hidden it in her lunchbox. She'd screamed when she saw it wriggling in her sandwich. Horrified, she'd tried to run away, but she hadn't realised that Bane Larkin was standing behind her. He'd smirked, and then pulled out another worm and dropped it in her hair. I went crazy. I charged at him like a rhino, but some older kids grabbed me and held me down until a teacher came along. Like a crazy animal, I bit and scratched them. He'd put a worm in April's hair. I wanted to murder him. April had cried for the rest of the day and had to be taken home. I'd been sent to the head teacher's office to calm down. That evening, I'd told Mum all about Bane. She'd said we would have to test him to check if he really was a vampire. "It's rare," she'd said, "for someone so young to be turned into a vampire." When I'd asked her why, she'd told me it was unnatural. "He'll be a child forever," she'd said. "He'll never grow up. Even vampires find that strange." I'd never thought about that before. If someone was bitten and turned into a vampire when they were young, they'd be stuck at that age for the rest of their lives. I'd tried to imagine what it would be like to be 8 years old forever. "You'll have to invite him over," Mum had said. "We need to check if you're right about him." "You've invited Bane Larkin for dinner?" April had asked the next day, her eyes wet. "But he put a worm in my hair." "It was my mum's idea," I'd said, feeling guilty. "You've never invited me over," April had told me. I'd felt terrible. The meal with Bane had been very awkward. First, Mum had shone a torch in his eyes to see if it caused him pain. It hadn't. Second, she'd passed a blue light across his skin to see if it burned him. It didn't. She'd glowered at me, shaking her head. I'd been wrong. Bane Larkin wasn't a vampire. He was just a really mean boy. There was no way I'd make that mistake twice. I didn't want to see that look on Mum's face again. I had to be sure about Dimmy before I told her. I would have to investigate by myself. Once dinner was over, Mum told me to change into my fighting gear, a black top, a black hoodie, and black leggings. I thought we were going to train in the basement, as usual, but when I got downstairs, Mum was standing by the front door. "It took you 5.5 minutes to get changed," she said, tapping her watch. "I was ready in 2. You need to be quicker, Henrietta. Much quicker." "I didn't know you were timing me," I replied, trying to stay polite. "And please, call me Etty." "Vampire hunters can't be styling their hair in the mirror when there's an emergency," she snapped. "I wasn't doing that." "You're right," she said. "Your hair's still tangled and messy." I drew in a deep breath to stay calm. Mum laid a hand on my shoulder and smiled. "I'm taking you on your first mission." Immediately, a rush of excitement flooded my veins. "What will we be doing?" I asked. "Hunting vampires, of course," she said. "We think there could be a clan of them in town. Another woman's been found dead. That's 2 in a month." "What?" I said, my mind struggling to catch up. "Deirdre Salome was found this morning," Mum answered. "A poisoned knife, the same as Helen." "A poisoned knife?" The words rattled in my brain. "Helen was poisoned with a knife," I said, appalled. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "It was confidential," Mum replied. "I know Helen was a friend of Grandma Elsie's, but believe me, Elsie will survive. There isn't a poison strong enough to stop that woman." I tried not to pull a face. Grandma Elsie's friend had been killed with a knife. I tried to suppress a shiver. "Why a knife? You said it was vampires. Why didn't they suck her blood? And why are they attacking innocent old women?" "Helen and Deirdre's houses were protected," Mum replied. "The vampires couldn't get inside, so they laced small knives with poison and threw them through the window. Deirdre managed to cut one of them before they got away. There were spots of blood." I covered my mouth with my hand. "The blood was black," Mum continued. Mum's training echoed in my head. "Vampire blood is darker than a human's. When it dries, it's like black tar." My hands began to tremble. Deirdre Salome had been attacked by vampires, and the same had happened to Helen. She hadn't died of old age. She'd been murdered. My stomach turned over. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to keep it together. Mum didn't seem to notice my distress. "One of the neighbours saw 3 men leaving Deirdre's house last night," she continued eagerly. "The men wore old-fashioned clothes. They were vampires. They had to be." "3?" I murmured. "Yes, Henrietta," she said. "We're heading to Deirdre's house. I left sensors there, and tonight someone set them off. Someone is in Deirdre's house right now, and I'll bet it's one of the vampires. They must have left something behind. We were going to Deirdre's house, where she died, where 3 vampires had murdered her. I can't go there. But there was no time to argue. Mum opened the door and marched out to the car, waving for me to follow her. I tried to swallow my fear. It didn't work. Be strong, Etty, I thought as I walked towards the car. You're a hunter.